In this video, I'm going to talk about 10 things I didn't know about Australia before moving here from the UK. Before I get into the list, a little background to me. I am from Manchester in England. I've lived most of my life there, but the past 7 years I've lived in Canada, I've lived in Australia, and I've spent quite a lot of time in Korea, which is where my wife is from. Yeah, and I think a lot of people in England have an idea of Australia in their head, and it's a little bit different from what you expect, because before I moved here, I thought there was a lot of similarities to England, and there is similarities, but there's also a lot of differences, some subtle, some not so subtle, which I'll go into today. So the very first thing on this list is the seasons and how it's not really a dramatical seasonal change like I'm used to in Europe. So most of the plants in Australia that are native to Australia are evergreen, so the leaves don't like turn colour, and so it kind of stays green the whole year round, where I'm used to in England and when I've been in Korea and Canada, obviously at autumn or in fall, you get all the leaves turn brown and fall. You don't really get that in Australia. So there's not that sense of the same sense of the seasons changing. And actually, I found out since moving here, the Aboriginal people in Australia have a different method to looking at the seasons that actually probably more accurately reflect how the seasons actually are. And I remember when I first come to Australia when I was 26, this is like really naive of me, but I didn't even know that the seasons were the opposite way around. So I arrived here in like February 2018, the first time I ever arrived here. And I remember arriving at the hostel, and then the staff was like, "Oh, it's a shame you've just missed the summer." And I was like, yeah. And then I was thinking in my head, have I? I didn't even realize that I'd missed the summer. And second on the list is around alcohol, and there's a few different points here. And I'd say the first one is that Aussies love a beer, but alcohol is a lot more expensive to buy, and in particular if you're buying it from the supermarket. Well, if you're buying it from a bottle shop, which they call in Australia, they don't actually sell the alcohol in the supermarkets. It's in a bottle shop. And also they have got different sizes. So in Sydney, it's mostly schooner and pint. And if you just order a beer, they will mostly assume that you're ordering a schooner. That's like the most common size, which before I moved here, I thought that, I'd always order pints, but I pretty much get schooners now when I go out. It's kind of like the perfect size drink, and especially when it's warm and your drink's bigger, obviously it's going to get warmer quicker, and Aussies love a cold beer, so I think that's why schooners are quite popular. But then when you go to other places in Australia, they have different sizes. So last year when I went to Melbourne, I remember I was asking for a beer, and then I asked for a schooner of something, and she was, "Oh, we don't do schooners, we do like smitties or something." And I'd never heard that word, and I was like, "Sorry, what is that? What's a smitty?" And she's like, "It's a smitty." Didn't give me any more information, so I just ordered it, not knowing what it was. It turns out it's like a smaller size beer than a schooner. The next one is that Australians have to vote. So when it comes to voting time, you'll see huge queues outside the stations, because by law, everyone has to vote when they're over a certain age, which is, I think that's a good thing. Like in England, it's not a by law, and a lot of young people don't vote. A lot of people don't get into voting until they're like in their late 20s and 30s. But next one is something I've not noticed loads of, but I know it happens a lot outside of Sydney, and that's that people don't always wear shoes. So sometimes if you're walking around, you'll just see people walking in barefoot in the supermarket or on the streets, which is wild to me. And I guess that is a bit of an indication of like how clean the streets are here. Like there's no way you'd walk around barefoot where I'm from in Manchester, because you would 100% be standing in glass at some point. Australians take their coffee really seriously, and something that really surprised me here is that chain coffee shops are not that big. Coming from England and like spending time in Korea, where there's Starbucks everywhere, Costa Coffee and like Mega Coffee and stuff like that in Korea. In Sydney, I think there's only like 2 Starbucks. And it was funny, the other day I was in the city, in the CBD, and I saw some American tourists and they were lost. And I was thinking, oh, maybe I should go and help them. And I could see on the phone that they had the map linked to go into Starbucks, because obviously Americans love Starbucks. But there's not many in Australia, because the coffee shops, the local ones, are really good. Like it's pretty much impossible to get like a bad coffee in Australia. They're all pretty decent. Point number 6 is around animals and how many animals you kind of see on a day-to-day. All these types of birds and animals that you'd never usually see. So I'd say in the past week, I've seen like a pelican, which are huge, loads of types of lizards. You hear like cockatoos, kookaburras and things like that, which I'd never heard of before moving to Australia, because a lot of these animals are native to Australia. The first time I ever come to Sydney, I got the train to Central, I walked off the platform and I saw a bin chicken, or white ibis as they're called. Took a photo, and that was the first ever photo I took in Australia because I couldn't believe this bird I was seeing. It almost looks like a dinosaur, but they're very common. You see them every single day. Point number 7, and probably my favourite point about living in Australia, is how multicultural it is. And I'm talking specifically about Sydney, of course, that's where I live. There is tons and tons of different cultural neighbourhoods. So you have like Chinatown, Vietnamese town, Korean town, Italian suburbs, Greek suburbs, Portuguese, you name it, they probably got it here, which is, yeah, really cool. And I had an idea in my head before I come to Australia that everyone was kind of white with blonde hair and a surfer dude. When I first come to Sydney, I'd never even used chopsticks before. And I remember when I met my now wife and we went on one of our first dates, I had no idea how to use chopsticks, and I was looking around and like everyone else did. And that kind of highlights the difference, I guess. If you grow up in an area like this, you're probably used to eating with chopsticks. And yeah, I had to ask for a fork. Point number 8 is how early things close. And specifically on a Sunday, if you go out after like 1 p.m, most things are going to be closed. And even like coffee shops, Aussies love the coffee, as I've mentioned, but they sometimes close before like 1 p.m. on a Sunday. And even if you go into the city, some of the best rated coffee shops in the city are just not even open at all on a weekend. And the shopping centres close quite early. I think on a Thursday they stay open later. But yeah, if you go out after like 8 or 9 p.m, pretty much everything's going to be closed. Number 9 is around the C word. A lot of Australians will throw this around casually with their friends and things like that. To me, it's still, when I hear that word, it's still like a really strong word, and I would not really say it myself, but it's quite common here to see Australians casually say that. And there's also other words which are really offensive in England, which Aussies say quite often. The overall quality of groceries is way higher, I'd say, in Australia. When you buy fruit and vegetables, the high quality, and it's not as expensive as the UK now. Don't get me wrong, it probably is more expensive to buy, but because of the wages here are higher, it works out more cost effective in Australia to buy this stuff. And the food quality is just really high, like not just from the supermarket, but when you go out to eat. So I think that's all of the points. I could make like 3 or 4 more videos around these things. And I don't want this to seem like a negative video, because I do love living in Australia. Just, yeah, some of the things that have surprised me since moving here.